I think probably the best way of describing motivation is just our drive to do things. Athletes, I think, tend to be fairly highly motivated beings, in the fact that, you know, people often ask me, when they ask me what I do for a living, and I say, well, I'm a psychologist and work with sports people, they say, oh, so you motivate people, do you? And oddly enough, it's one of the things that is the smallest problem, is actually motivating people, you know, because actually most people have their own motivations, but sometimes it can be really good to understand how you make that motivation work for you as well, and probably looking at that interplay between control, between stress, and where we just get joy, which is a really important part of being able to stay in something long enough to just do it. And so probably the first thing to look at, and we can use some of these words and they mean the same thing. You know, we can talk about drive, we can talk about motivation, but probably if we considered that as a spectrum, and we looked at internal motivation at one end and external motivation at the other. And internal motivation would be the stuff that we do purely from the joy of doing it, if you like. And I might be wrong, but I suspect that most people who start sport or do sport from a young age do it because they just love the joy of movement, and that's their initial thing. And we all get that lovely pleasure just from moving and just from doing stuff. So it becomes almost circular. We enjoy moving, we move more, we enjoy moving more, and we get better at it. And then we start to get other things happen to us around motivation that can impact on it. I think other people sometimes find that they start to move later in lives perhaps because they've had a health problem, or perhaps because they put weight on, or perhaps because actually work's taken over. And other people can become very, very good athletes and start later on in life. And they may do it from the joy of movement, but they may also do it from other drivers. And it's just worth understanding that, because if we look at our internal motivation and we consider that probably that comes from the stuff that internally we just want to do it. We like sitting on a bike and going out for those miles. We like being able to run. We like being able to swim. I kayak, I just enjoy that, and been on the river and doing that. External motivation is almost that idea of getting something for it, you know, whether it be a medal, whether it be praise from a coach, whether it be a PB, whatever it is. So at one end of the spectrum, we're almost doing it for the internal pleasure, and at the other end of the spectrum, we're doing it for what we get from it. And of course, then we get a bunch of stuff that sits in between those two endpoints that may be a combination of both. It's worth just investigating why you do stuff and being really, really clear about it, because sometimes you need that motivation, and you actually might need, when it's painful, a reason to keep going, when you're not getting results or things aren't moving. Because again, if we look at how development happens, we know that people tend to plateau, and then you'll move again, and then you'll plateau and move again, and it may feel as though that plateau's gone on forever, and we might need to have stuff that tells us. So just being aware of what you've got, and being aware of what's internal, what's external, and what's both. But the reason I talk about them both is when we look at perhaps where we have the most level of control, we probably, and I've put this out, and I say this probably because I've put this out to athlete groups, and some have come back the other way, but in general, I would say we have a higher level of control with stuff where we're purely internally motivated. Tell me if that sounds reasonable to you. So I'm doing this because I like doing it. That's a pretty high level of control.
I think it's good. I think a lot of people try and almost take more control because they've chosen to do it. It's their decision. That element of choice, I think, is really important.
So they've made that, yeah, that's really good. They've made that choice to do that particular thing. And then you might look at why you do it and what you want to. And sometimes you need to have those things really clear to come back to you when you need to use them. So I love getting people, by the way, to do little bits of writing and journaling. And the reason I do is because I figure that if someone's spending 10 hours a week training, or 15 hours a week, or even more training, perhaps up to 20 hours a week or more training, that the amount of time that it takes to monitor what you're doing and why you're doing it, and perhaps writing a paragraph or a couple of sentences every time, which gives you this weight of knowledge about yourself over time, or these layers of knowledge about yourself over time, takes such a small amount of time and effort compared to the amount of effort it takes to do the training itself. And if we look at where there's high levels of control, we've also get lower levels of stress. So in general, if we know that we're in a situation where we've got full control, our stress is lower. So again, that internal, the more we can get that internal drive, the lower our stress is.
So what would you do with someone who turns up to you and you're like, I don't basically go to you, I'm really struggling with motivation. Where does that lead you, or where do you start thinking?
I think the truth of it is it leads us into a conversation that starts to look at what they mean by that and what they're actually talking about there, and perhaps starting to come back and look at maybe where some of the stressors are in their lives and what's causing that statement to happen. And the truth of that is I don't know what that is going to be until we get into that conversation, but actually starting to investigate that. So why are you doing that sport? You know, what's it giving you? And perhaps starting to look at some of the things that it is giving you that may have got lost along the way. So very, very often, you know, I would get someone who's struggling with motivation, and what we find is that perhaps what they're doing isn't working with their life as it sits. You know, they may have started doing something and then got into a busy phase at work or a change in life. And actually that activity now starts to become a stressor rather than a pleasure. And we may need to look at how we start to make that work within their life per se, or whether indeed it's the right thing to be doing at the moment. You know, there's nothing says that you always have to be training, because again, you know, if we look at other things that are going on, and we're looking at the overall load that exists, training at the wrong times can simply be a stressor. As well, you know, if we make it work for someone, it can be the best stress release that we could possibly get. But we've got to make and understand what's going on, which again I think is what good coaches do, isn't it? You won't work with an athlete in a vacuum.
No, definitely not. And I guess that lack of motivation is more of a flag to say there's something else going on, rather than motivation is an issue in its own right.
That's absolutely right, because they've come into that sport for a reason, and it may be that we need to investigate what those motivations were in the first place, and perhaps they're not working anymore for them, and we look at other things that are important. But absolutely, you know, that would absolutely be a flag to start to look. And it may be, for instance, that what we've got is someone who's too heavily loaded, and you know, their mood state has changed, the joy goes out of things, and that's that internal motivation gone, because actually you're doing something for joy if the joy's not there. So that may, you know, but all it is a flag to say, well, let's see what's going on here, and let's find out, and then let's see what we may need to shift or change perception, or change in training, or change in approach, or look at, you know, what is driving you.
Nice, that's good.
Now, happy with that one?
Yeah, that was really good. Because realistically, that's why I asked the question. Most people come saying, I'm lacking motivation. That's well, that's going to be a big question, isn't it? They're not going to say, I've got loads of motivation.
No, but it's a wonderful start, because it says, okay, well, let's see what's happening then. Let's and then you do that audit almost, don't you?
Exactly. Right, so competition checklist is the last one.
Okay, just let me make a couple of notes. So